looks at it, to a human it's a glass of water, right? Does the quality of being water and the nature and identity of being water, excuse me, come from the stuff? That's the analysis, that's the discussion. Because a pleasure realm being, a higher realm being, would look at this glass of liquid and experience it as exquisite ambrosia or something like that, right? Whereas a human would look at it and experience it as water, and say a craving spirit would look at it and experience it as, something that burns their throat, perhaps, right? It looks desirable, but then burns their throat. So, and I mean, I have to say it now, they're using a glass of water as a simple example, and it's a little dry and perhaps a little abstract, but you can take anything. This applies to anything. I mean, you can take any existing object. It could be a wall. I mean, you can take a tea kettle, right? You can say, well, is it possible, just in a really crude way, is it possible that three different kinds of beings could look at a hot tea kettle on a stove and have three completely different experiences, Sure, I mean, even just in a simple observable realm, we're looking at a hot tea kettle on the stove thinking, oh, this is going to be a lovely, delicious cup of tea that's being produced. And a fly lands on the teapot and burns its legs off and has a, horrible experience of a molten ground, that kills it. And a dog could be sitting there looking at it completely oblivious, like, it means nothing, right? There's no consequence of any kind, no meaning of any kind, right? So it's not, I mean, even on a crude level, one can observe, and beings that are part of our ordinary reality, one can look at something and say, yeah, one thing could be very different to different kinds of beings, right? So they take this analysis further than that. They go beyond that, and they say, okay, let's take a glass of water and let's take beings from three very different realms. Is it possible that a pleasure realm being and a craving spirit, a human, could be in the same place? I mean, there's three of us right here around this table looking at the same stuff. Is it possible that the three of us are sitting here observing and experiencing the same thing as three completely different objects, three completely different substances, right? How could the stuff in this cup be three different things at once? How is it possible that one thing can be three things? How is it possible that if one of them leaves the room and there are only two beings here, it's now two different things and not three different things? Like, how can this cup of liquid sometimes be three things, sometimes be one thing, sometimes be two things, or four things, according to which beings are present and observing it, right? So that's the point that which is raised. It's like, come on, how can reality exist that way? How can you think of things that way, and how can you look at things that way, right? So they talk about material cause, which we covered previously, and they would say there's a liquid in the glass, right? And then there are three different perceptions of liquid from three different beings, right? There is no base reality, right? There is no substance which exists in the glass that has any nature of its own, right? So there isn't something in here which is broadcasting its nature of ambrosia or water or burning, liquid, burning whatever it is, nasty pus or whatever for a hungry ghost. There's nothing in here which has any nature of its own to broadcast that experience or definition or meaning or flavor or anything else, right? It doesn't come from the stuff in this cup, right? There is something in this cup, right? There is stuff in this cup, but it doesn't have any nature of its own. It doesn't have any qualities of its own, right? Where do those things come from? They're supplied by the being which is perceiving it, right? They're supplied by the being which is experiencing it, right? So the karma of that being is the thing which produces their experience of the substance, right? So what's really there? I ask you, what's really there?
Emptiness.
Yeah, nothing, because my cup's empty. have a yawn, okay? No. Well, emptiness isn't there because emptiness is a negation. Emptiness is the absence of something.
That's
So you
what's
can
in
say,
there.
yeah, there's absence of tea, but that's a different matter. It's not what we're really talking about is emptiness. Well, if you're going to say there's emptiness, you have to explain it, right? When you talk about emptiness, you always talk emptiness. Something is always empty. Emptiness is attached to something. Whenever you talk about emptiness, it's always attached to something. Something is empty of self-existence, right? So if you're going to say there's emptiness here, where? And with what?
To the liquid.
Like the raw data.
It's a blank screen until it's projected upon by the individual's karma.
And you can say there's a basis, right? You can say there's a basis of perception. There's a basis of valid perception, right? Okay. What that basis is experienced as, what that basis is perceived as, is determined by the being doing the perceiving, right? And I think this is actually a very profound point because I like to stretch to physics sometimes. It may not be literally accurate, but I find it's a useful way of thinking. Like, think about like Holy Yeshua Michael when he was teaching the other weekend. He was talking about the old experiment with the light and refraction gratings and particles and waves and points. How can one thing be two things? Well, how can a particle of light be both a point and a wave? How can one thing be three things? So it's not a big stretch to say, well, quantum physics is fairly well stated that the observer affects the outcome, right? That they've measured through many scientific experiments, that the observer, right, has an effect on the outcome of the experiments, right? And that it's almost not possible to have a completely objective experiment because of the observer effect, especially at a quantum level. And so I find it to be very useful. It's kind of parallel thinking with what we're talking about here with the tshuva, the water analysis. And it's not just the water, it applies to everything. They're talking about a cup of water, okay, but we're really talking about every single thing in our reality. All right? So, we start with a cup of water because it's innocuous and simple and doesn't have a lot of baggage attached
John,
to
I
it.
have a question.
Yeah.
In the notes it says that there's liquid in the
Mhm.
cup. Is there even liquid in the cup? I mean,
Isn't that
Yeah.
perception? It could be
Absolutely.
something non-liquid.
Yeah. So it's liquid.
It's stuff. It's something.
It's a basis of perception, right? So there's a basis, there is something which we're perceiving, right? We are perceiving, right? What are we perceiving? Because this is what it comes down to, isn't it? We want to know what we're perceiving, don't we? Like, what is it? What am I perceiving, please? If I'm not perceiving water, what am I perceiving? Okay. Well, I'm perceiving shimmering, a roundness, movement, right? I'm perceiving at every level I can perceive with my senses. Are there other levels of perception possible beyond my senses? Absolutely. I mean, I see certain things, but there's plenty of stuff I can't see. I mean, I got a small spectrum of the wavelengths of light that I can perceive. My God, it's like 1/100th of not even of a wavelength of the full spectrum of visible, of visual perception, right? So my God, even just looking at this stuff and saying it's liquid, if I could see the entire spectrum, I probably wouldn't even be calling it liquid. I'd be calling it something else. And if I could smell like the full range of smell, whatever a dog smells 100 times more powerful than our smell, I'd probably have a completely different experience of it. And if my mind functioned completely differently, right, to process the data in a different way, I'd come to a completely different conclusion, right? So, is it liquid? You see? I mean, liquid is a name and a term to describe our relativistic world. Everything is relative. Everything is relativistic. Everything is conceptual. Everything is a construct, right? And so, what happens when you go beyond the construct? right? What happens when we say, yeah, I'm experiencing this as a series of constructs. Now, is there anything there other than my series of constructs? Yeah, there is existence, right? There is existence.
But-
We simply happen to have a very narrow spectrum of existence which we are consciously perceiving. Yeah.
But in terms of, even saying that there is a basis that I am
Perceiving.
perceiving, or that I am projecting my, whatever my karma is or whatever onto, if there are things that you can't even see, and that we don't experience in this room, in that cup, whatever, how can you even say that there is a basis if you know what I mean? If you're not,
If you can't perceive them in this moment, does that mean they're not there? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying, okay, there's the three beings that are in the room that are looking at the
Yeah.
cup, and we're saying that that thing is three different, comes up as three different things for each of them, and then you're saying, but there is some kind of basis there.
There is
that
data. Yeah,
there is data that they're projecting, right?
Well, no, there is data that they're
That
taking
there's
in,
data that's there. Yeah, okay.
which they're taking in through their senses
Okay.
and processing with their mind,
Mhm.
and then conceptualizing and projecting onto the basis.
Yeah, but considering that, for example, there could be a being, let's say there's a fourth being that doesn't see something there at all.
Yeah.
How can you say there's a basis if there isn't something appearing? Something, it doesn't have to be the same thing. There isn't something appearing
Yeah.
for all beings. Just like for us, for example, there could be a hungry ghost in this room. If we're not perceiving them, how could that be
Yeah.
conceived as a basis?
Yeah.
Does the hungry ghost see us?
Well, let me answer his question first. So, let's say you look at something with this is just a, parallel what you're saying. Let's say you look at something with an electron microscope, right? And you say, oh, I can see these things with an electron microscope. But if I didn't have an electron microscope, I wouldn't be seeing them in this room. Does that mean they're not here because I don't have an electron microscope to look at? You know what I mean? I'm not perceiving them in the moment, but that doesn't mean they're not there. I'm limited by my senses as to what I can perceive. Like I can say, okay, look, I don't know what light. You're a sound guy, Paul. What's like the range of audible sound, like from whatever hertz to whatever hertz, right?
20 to 20,000.
Thank you. What do we hear?
That's what we hear, and that's
Well,
a lot more.
So we've got that range of sound that we can hear, but we can't hear below and above that range, right? But that doesn't mean they're not going on around us all the time, just because we're not tuning into them, So I don't know if that, but it's like that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I get that. I guess my point is, for example, with the cup,
Yeah.
in terms of your example with the decibels,
Yeah.
Obviously the other three beings see something there, so that there's obviously something there. But then for the being that doesn't see anything there, how can you say that there is?
Well, let's say.
Because then I guess
Yeah.
there's basis for everything and for anything all around us.
So let's say a blind guy is one of the four people, right? Let's say there's a human with regular sight and a blind human. And the human with sight is saying, oh, there's a cup of water there. And the blind guy's going like, oh, I don't see any cup of water. What are you talking about? There's no cup of water there. And that's valid for him, you see? Just as it's valid for the human with sight, that they see a cup of water. And that's exactly the point, The reality.
But I guess my issue is that I feel like you're saying there is a basis there from its own side. That's what I'm understanding.
Did anyone in this room hear me say from its own side ever about this?
So the fact that
But
When you
the
say
chan-
basis,
yeah, when you say
are
basis,
we being up to
yeah.
that
So you're saying the
information?
basis exists from its own side? Is that?
that's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay,
I'm not
alright.
I'm not understanding
Okay.
that
Well,
that
just-
language of basis.
Just want to be
is what I'm
clear
getting.
here about what we're talking about, all right?
Because in the original course, Master Chan, they put the example of Master Chandakirti saying the Nirlangikyo, the principal cause is liquid, yeah, which
It's a material
says,
cause, yeah.
yeah, which says is the basis.
Yeah.
Then
The contributing
the
factors, yeah.
contributing factors are the karmas of the
Right,
three
right.
individuals.
Yeah.
And then the argument is if all three tongues touch the liquid at exactly the same point, I think here is where my mind went, what? Master Chandrakirti says when there are three beings, there's three subsets in the Nirlangikyo has three
Parts?
parts, yeah, and if there were two beings, it would have two parts.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so
And it can have 20 parts if there's
Sure,
20. yeah.
Sure. So I like to do the quantum physics thing because it's an easy way to think of it. Like, and this is not Master Chandrakirti or the scriptures or anything else, right? Think about like quantum stuff, like cosmic soup, which is not in the scriptures, and it's very bad to talk about this from a scriptural perspective. But just think about something. Let's say it differently. Think about stuff which could arise as anything. It's like Star Trek. It's maybe a better way to approach
Yeah,
it.
the quantum possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, like think about Star Trek. Like there's stuff that can arise as anything, and it's just a matter of what you get it to arise as, and it can morph from one thing to the next thing in an instant. And it can arise as this in 1 second, and arises that in the next second.
But we're implying that there is a stuff from its own side that's arising.
Nobody said from its own side. Who said from its own side? We just said there's stuff, but define stuff. And see, we have to be clear about what you mean when you say from its own side. So let's be very careful about how we're talking about this and how we're thinking about it, right? Because when you say from its own side, the Buddhist meaning of that is independent of causes, parts, or labels. Okay? If you say something exists from its own side, you're saying it exists independent of name, or term, or causation, or parts. No, we're not saying that.
Okay.
We're not saying the stuff that's there exists free of parts. We're not saying the stuff that's there exists free of causes. And we're not saying that stuff that's there exists free of our names and terms. In fact, it's the only way we can talk about it is to give it names and terms, right?
And so that what gives it existence? Right?
The fact that we think of it makes it a valid perception for us, is what a valid, and so this is where it's very important that, we've talked about valid perception. So, what is a valid perception? Does anybody remember from 2 weeks ago?
That perceived by a valid perception.
Perceived by emptiness.
Direct and indirect.
You
If you
Something which
emptiness-
appears to an unaffected state of mind. A normal perception
A pramana.
by an unaffected state of mind, which we're having all day long, right? So, when we have a valid perception, we are experiencing our reality. What is a valid perception? Any ordinary perception we have is a valid perception.
Right, but I kind of get what, I don't know if it's been remedied for you, but now that you're asking this question, it's making me think more about it. It's like the metaphors are kind of problematic.
Well, everything
Because
breaks
when
down.
we use, right,
so-
of course, but then when you say like, oh, it's like a projector screen, so what's the projector screen? So
What
do
is the
we
screen or what
create,
is the
by having a
projector?
perception,
Yeah.
What is the screen?
do we create the screen
Yeah,
and the projector?
Exactly.
Yeah, so this is what, so let's talk about it step by step, okay? So we're clear about the projector aspects. We have the projector and the projector screen, right? So I think we're clear, from what I hear, we're clear on the projector aspect, right?
Yeah.
Based upon our past karma,
Yeah.
ideas are arising in the mind,
Mhm.
concepts are arising in the mind, thoughts, right? And then we go, that's blue and that's red and this is good and that's bad and that's a male and that's a female and I want this and I don't want that, right? So that's the mental ideation, right? The karmic ripenings and projections, right? Onto what? Right? Data. Why data? Because as human beings, we have 6 senses, 5 senses plus our mind, and we experience the world and we experience reality via our 6 senses. We can only experience the world through sensory inputs in our mind, right? So when you say what's there for me as a human being, what's there for me as a human being is what my senses can detect through their sensory capacities, right? And what my mind can process through its
Yeah.
processing mental capacity.
Yeah.
Now, is that what's really there?
Yeah.
So my senses are detecting stuff, and my mind is, the wheels are spinning and it's spewing out stuff. Is that what's really there? No. So what's really there? No. It's not nothing. What's really there? That's the problem. We're limited by our senses and our mind in understanding what's really there. What's really there?
Cause
Emptiness and ultimate reality. what is emptiness and ultimate reality? Emptiness means that, I'll say it differently, ultimate reality, right? The perception of emptiness, the experience of ultimate reality is, be very careful when I say it, is perceiving existence free of concepts and constructs. Okay? How can you perceive what's there without a concept and a construct? I ask you. And
See,
how can you
that's-
explain
that's-
that?
I guess that's the class that I was having, is because having listened to Geshe-La's, I don't remember which class or course it was, but where he talks about, you know, you look at the pen
Yeah.
and you can't be looking at this part of the pen and that
Yeah.
part of the pen at the same time.
Yeah.
And he breaks it down and keeps going smaller and
Yeah.
smaller, and then talks
Mhm.
about the atom like he did in
Yeah.
the talk a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
It almost, to me, it got to the point where there actually is nothing out there.
Nope.
And not that, and he always says it's not that nothing
Yeah.
exists. I
Yeah,
understand
yeah.
that part.
Sure.
But there isn't anything out there from its own side.
From its own side.
Again, but even the from its own side part is, even the data, from what I understood,
Yeah.
was even the data doesn't exist from its own side.
Yeah, but
It's almost like we're creating the data.
Well, again, what does from its own side mean?
Again, I guess that's another definition.
So here's an easier way for me to think about it. An easier way for me to think about it is every single thing we experience, every single thing we perceive as an ordinary human being, we perceive and experience through a concept and a mental construct. Ultimately, ultimate reality is free of those things. Okay? So, can we perceive a reality without using a construct and an idea in an intellectual process? You see, when you meditate, when one meditates, okay, if one becomes a meditator, and if one does retreat in a consistent way, right? It's very clear to observe the levels of mind, right? And as one meditates, it's very easy to say, "Oh, look at that! My dualistic intellectual mind has stopped functioning. Okay, my mind has become subtle enough that I'm no longer thinking intellectual thoughts. You know, I mean, I'm describing this intellectual thoughts, mind you, but you know, in meditation, one can go like, okay, oh, here we are, and I'm not thinking this is blue and this is red and blah 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 blah. Okay, and so as the mind becomes more subtle, okay, you go down. And the mind functions at a more subtle level. Okay, so first the discursive thought stops. You know, you stop thinking, what's that noise? What's that sound? Oh, I don't like that. And then, you know, as you go down through your as you become more skilled in meditation, then the mind quiets down and stops functioning at these levels which we're talking about right now. And the mind can you know, fairly readily reach a point where it's active and aware and bright and engaged and not intellectual and not discursive, you know, but still aware and knowing, you see? And so we don't function that way in our normal life, but it's fairly straightforward and it's fairly, one can observe it without experiencing ultimate reality. One can observe the mind functioning in a much more subtle fashion, free of intellectual thought, free of all of these names and labels and terms which are projected. And so one can have the experience in meditation of, oh, okay, you know, I don't have to be thinking thoughts to experience, you know. I don't have to have dualistic ideation to be aware, you know. But then, you know, you have to keep going with that, and then it becomes a question of, well, as you go further and further and you experience ultimate reality, then what is that? So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, it did.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say, and I think I know the answer to this,
Good, then never mind.
is it fair to say that if we're talking about a projector, and like let's say a projector and a screen as an analogy,
Yeah.
the things that are projected onto the screen are not ultimate.
They are karmic ripenings.
Right. So is it fair to say then that the absence of the projection would mean that the direct perception of emptiness is a direct perception of a blank screen?
Close. So the mind is aware and knowing, right? There's the main mind, and then there's various mental functions and processes. So the main mind is the thing which is sentient, aware, and knowing, right? It becomes a question of what's going on in the main mind, if you will. What is arising in the main mind, right? And so emptiness, right, is a perception, right? Just like looking at the wall is a perception. Where do perceptions come from? Karmic seeds ripening, right? Is a karmic seed ripening a perception? Karmic seed ripening produces a perception. So certain karmic seeds have to ripen to produce the perception of emptiness and ultimate reality, right? And they, oh, that's kind of
So what do you have to do to get the karmic seeds for that?
a very important question, Isadora. Essential question, key question, right? How does one collect the karmic seeds such that those seeds will ripen into the valid perception of ultimate reality?
Keep dedicating karma?
No, Holy Geshe Michael, he would speak about it occasionally, and he would say very directly that, you know, it's not something to talk about in a public audience or a large audience, but frankly, it's serving holy beings. You know, one needs extremely powerful karma. It's serving the Dharma, it's serving teachers, and hundreds and thousands of hours of intellectual study of emptiness. You know, one has to really steep the mind in wisdom, which is synonymous with removing obscurations and obstacles. One has to clean negativities from the mind. I mean, as we were talking about in meditation, the mind becomes more and more subtle, right? Well, if you have afflictions in the mind, it's not subtle. The mind is disrupted by the afflictions. And so one has to have a fairly pure mind and a fairly, quite a still mind, right? And it's like, I almost don't want to mention it, but it's perhaps useful to mention. It's the analogy of if you have a still body of water and the full moon is reflecting, the moon reflects clearly. And if there's wind or chop on the water and the surface of the water, all you see is broken bits, you know, broken shards of light, you know. And so it's a, you know, perhaps a nice metaphor for, you know, for seeing ultimate reality. To the extent the mind is very still and calm and clean, one can have a true picture of what's there, ultimately. And to the extent the mind is turbulent, one only sees confusing broken shards of reality. And I actually find it to be very poetic actually to think that our ordinary perceptions of reality are really just seeing broken bits of a higher reality. You know, it's like we're experiencing a broken reality, you know, a shadow of a higher reality. I mean, it's not a good metaphor, but it's sort of taking the moon on the water thing a little further. I don't remember if I answered your question. Okay, moving on. So why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about this analysis? Why? Because it doesn't just apply to a glass of water. It applies to our bodies and our environment, right? This body isn't a body from its own side. Like this glass of water is not a glass of water from its own side. 3 different beings in this room. To one, I'm a scary demon. To another, I'm a Buddha. To another, I'm an ordinary human being. Which one am I really? Depends on who's there, who's looking at it, right? Why do we care? Why is it relevant? Because I want to be one of the beings that sees myself as a Buddha. That's why. How do I get to see myself as a Buddha? How do I get to see myself as a holy being? You know, as an enlightened being? by collecting powerful karma, by collecting the karmic seeds which will ripen into that perception, right? Because I don't have any existence from my own side. I don't have any identity or nature from my own side. And that's the basis of Tantra, and that's the point of Tantra. The point of Tantra is to collect the karmas, to collect these very powerful karmic seeds, virtuous karmic seeds, which will ripen in this lifetime before we die, so that we can perceive ourselves, validly perceive ourselves as holy beings and enlightened beings, right? And it's this race against time, right? To collect these powerful karmas before we have the perception of, this body falling over and going on to the next life, right? So that is the reason for studying Tantra, and that is the reason for the higher secret practices of Buddhism, is to teach more powerful karmic means and more powerful karmic methods to collect these heavy-duty virtues which can ripen fast enough and big enough in this lifetime to have the valid perception of a pure realm and a pure reality, and to see ourselves as pure beings, right? So we have to talk about collecting karmas and how to collect powerful karmas, right? Very important to cover. So to collect the full karma, there's something called a karmic path, and I don't want to get too technical, but there are basic certain things which make karmas more or less powerful. And so if we're going to be experts at collecting powerful karma, we need to know what a powerful karma is and what a wimpy karma is, right? So there are 4 parts to what's called a karmic path or a path of action. And basically, you need to have all 4 components present to have a big, fat, juicy, powerful karma, right? And this is not just virtuous; it's non-virtuous too. It goes both ways. So the first element of a complete karmic path is called the basis. What is the object involved? What are you collecting the karma in relation to or towards, right? If you're doing non-virtue, who are you stealing from? Who are you killing? If you're doing virtue, who are you helping? Who are you benefiting, right? And so then the second is what is your thought process? Are you heavily afflicted? Are you in this massive ignorance and negativity, or are you having some kind of positive motivation to help? And we're gonna expand upon that in a couple of minutes, but I'm just giving you the 4 main. And then the third is undertaking the action. You actually have to go and do it. It's not enough to think, wouldn't it be great if that homeless guy had some food? That's just a little part of the karma. You have to actually go buy some food, to have a complete karmic path. So you undertake the deed. Did you give the homeless guy some food? Did you steal? Did you kill? Did you make an offering? Whatever, right? And then did you complete the deed? Did you actually finish what you set out to do? So these 4 things make a complete karmic path, right? The object that you're engaging, right? The thought process, which we're going to talk about more. Undertaking, completing the deed, right? So, for example, if you say, oh God, I hate that person, I just, I'm so pissed off at them, I'm gonna smash their window, and get back at them, did you go find a rock, and did you throw the rock, and did you actually hit the window or break the window, or did you miss and it bounced off the side of the house and you ran away because you were afraid, So, in that case, it's not a complete karma because you didn't complete the deed, right? You have the first 3, but you don't have the 4th. So all 4 of these have to be present to have a complete powerful karma, for better or for worse, right? It's like, well, I really tried to help, but I got busy and, didn't actually finish it, or I started and then I got busy and I did 2/3 of it, but not a complete karmic path, right? Something like that, okay? So then let's talk a little bit more about the thinking involved, right? So, there are 3 different aspects to this, to how you think about things when you're engaging, right? The first is called correct identification. Did you accurately identify the thing? Like some people engage in abortions and they say, well, it's not a living being, right? And so there's an identification that this is a lump of something and it's not a sentient being, and they kill it. And so from a Buddhist perspective, you'd say that's not correct identification. From a Buddhist perspective, at the time of conception, there's sentience, The mind stream is associated with the body, and it's a living being from the time of conception, right? So from a Buddhist perspective, you don't have correct identification there. So in that regard, it wouldn't be a complete karmic path. Okay. If you do have correct identification, like, I hate that person, I'm so sick of them, I'm gonna kill them. When you go and they are the person that you hate, you have identified them correctly. So, okay. And then secondly, the second element of how you're thinking about it is are you afflicted, right? What's the state of your mind? Did you have a strong active mental affliction when you committed the deed? Like, think about it. Like, if you do something with emotional intensity, it's much more powerful than if you just have some sort of lackadaisical feeling going on. It's like, oh, let me help somebody. And you're just like, oh yeah, here you go, yeah, right? No big deal. Not a lot of energy behind it, not a lot of oomph to it. But if you really have this strong feeling, whether it's compassion or love or hatred or whatever the strong emotional feeling is, makes it much more powerful. Yeah.
Can you say that the fact that you see something as being self-existent is not correct identification to begin with?
Well, yeah. I mean, from the perspective of ignorance, we have not had a correct perception of our entire existence from time immemorial, up until the time we experience ultimate reality. So every single moment of every single day, we have ignorance pervading everything we do. Which is a subtle negative karma that we're collecting constantly. But this we're talking about conventionally, just in our conventional lives and in our conventional world. Like I hate Fred, I'm going to kill Fred, and then you go and you shoot somebody, and it wasn't Fred, oh my God, it was Bruce or Bill, or Mary, whatever, right? So I mean just in a simple way, you thought you were killing Bill, and you ended up killing Mary. That's not correct identification. So, and then what was the emotional content? Strong emotional content or not? Strong emotional content, affliction or compassion makes the karma more powerful, right? And then motivation, did you really want to hurt the person, right? Like, was it premeditated? Like, did you stew about this for weeks before you went and broke the window or stabbed them or whatever, right? Or was it this thing which was just sort of like this reflexive, thoughtless, impulsive reaction, which was just out of the blue seemingly, right? So also an important element of the karma, and what kind of karma you collected, right? I mean, it's like, it's very much like the law, is it premeditated murder, or was it, accidental or second degree or whatever you got? So karma is the same thing.
Or self-defense.
Yeah, or self-defense. So when you look at all of these different elements together, okay, all of these elements constitute karmic impact, you could say, right? So when you go down the list and you say, okay, I'm going to find a holy object to help, right? Powerful object, right? I'm going to, set my motivation that I'm going to help this person so that, we can benefit as many people as possible together. We can reach hundreds of thousands of people to improve their lives, right? And, I got the correct identification. They are, in fact, a holy being that can help a lot of people, right? And, I have this strong feeling of love and compassion. I really feel in my heart that I want to help, and it really is important to me, and it really means a lot to me, right? And, so you have this powerful karma and this positive motivation, this intense motivation and this positive motivation, right? And then you set out to do it, and then you finish doing it. Well, that's a big, fat, juicy karma, right? Which will ripen quickly and bring a powerful result. So this is the understanding of how to collect powerful karmas, which will ripen quickly. And this is the basis of Tantra. The basis of Tantra is to say, how can we collect these big, fat, juicy karmas, which are going to ripen quickly in this life, right? Okay. Make sure we hit everything in the next 5 minutes. All right, so since we only have 5 minutes, I'm just going to touch on the information and the homework. So when we talk about the 6 perfections and what makes them extraordinary, or what makes them perfections, like take giving, for example, or perfection of giving. What makes giving perfect? It's doing it with wisdom, right? Seeing the emptiness of the giver and the recipient in the action. So when you're collecting a karma around giving, for example, and you talk about the object, right? There are qualities associated with the object which make it more or less powerful. So to take giving as an example, and this would apply to anything, there are different qualities that make the object a more powerful karmic object. So the type of being is first. Like, is it a holy being, right? Powerful. Is it a human being, or is it an animal? You know, is it better to, you know, help a dog or a cat, or, you know, a human? Is it better to feed a stray dog or a cat, or a hungry human? Well, I say a hungry human because they have a mind which has the potential to become enlightened, whereas in this lifetime a dog or a cat does not, for example. And then secondly, it's more powerful to help someone who's really in need. You know, someone who's sick, right? Someone who, I mean, helping someone who really needs something when they need it is more powerful than helping someone who doesn't need it so much. It's just like, you got a guy here who's like sick on the street, shivering in the cold, and you're gonna give him a couple of bucks to go on the subway. You're gonna give a couple of bucks to the guy who's just sitting there that's on the corner every day with the same cup. More powerful to help the guy who really needs it. You know, who's shivering in the cold and needs to get out, you know, get out of the cold. Right? And then thirdly, helping, in this case, giving to those who have helped you in the past. You know, those beings who have benefited you are also powerful objects. People who have helped you in your life or in our lives when we've needed it. You know, we've had hard times, or you know, we've needed things, and someone has come through for us and helped us and benefited us. You know, reciprocating and giving to them makes them a powerful karmic object also. Okay, and then the fourth element is according to their good qualities. Like someone who's an Arya, for example, would be a great person to give to because they have many good qualities. You know, if you're going to give to someone who has, would you give to somebody who's like, how to say this? Like, as a human being, right? Is it better to give to somebody who has realizations in their mind, or to give to somebody who's ignorant? No, better to give to somebody who has realizations in their mind. Kind of point. Right? Okay. So then there's this idea of in our pursuit of virtue and enlightenment, we're collecting vast stores of positive karma and positive potential and positive energy, right? And it's actually possible to substantially damage the virtue that we collected, the virtue that we collect and the positive karma that we collect. There's something called a root of virtue, or most basic virtue, right? And it refers broadly to our store of good karma, and more specifically, it refers to what's called the store of merit. I mean, to become enlightened, you basically have sort of two broad classes of virtue we collect. One is called accumulating. They're called the two collections: the collection of merit and the collection of wisdom. So, collection of wisdom are collecting karmas which result in the mind of an enlightened being, and the collection of merit are collecting virtues which result in the bodies of an enlightened being. Okay, so the idea here is that it's possible to destroy our store of merit, cut our root of virtue, and damage the collection of merit which produces the physical body of an enlightened being. And how does that happen? It happens when a human being who has a strong mind, who has an intellectual capacity, holds sustained, powerful wrong views. You know, if a person isn't thinking clearly, if they don't have a sharp mind, it doesn't apply. This is about someone who has sharp faculty, sustained intellectual reasoning, and goes through analysis and the rest, and comes to the conclusion that things really are self-existent. There really is no such thing as karma. There really is no such thing as emptiness. So holding these sustained wrong views as a conclusion for a long period of time does substantial damage to the store, to one's collection of merit, to the store of virtue. So I think personally, I would imagine it would be kind of hard to do if you're a well-educated Buddhist, because you would have to be able to do the analysis and come to a conclusion and hold that conclusion and sustain that conclusion over a period of time. So I think that, to me, one of the big dangers is receiving bad teachings and lame teachings where, you get enough of a teaching to do the analysis, and come to a conclusion based upon wrong teachings. But I would presume even then that you wouldn't be able to restore virtue. But I go over it because it's some homework. Describe 2 actions which can cause a loss of basic virtue. 2 actions which can cause a loss. The most basic virtue are development of wrong views wherein you hold that the laws of karma and enlightened beings do not exist, or having intense anger focused to the bodhisattva or other very intense non-virtues. So there are 5, there are things which are called 5 immediate misdeeds. We're talking about karma again, and we're talking about big fat juicy karmas, right? And you can collect big fat juicy virtuous karmas, you can collect big fat juicy non-virtuous karmas. Among the big fat juicy non-virtuous karmas are the 5 immediate misdeeds, right? Which include creating a schism, trying to
Like the body of the Buddha,
body of a Buddha.
Arya,
Yep. What? Say the whole thing.
the Arya, hurting an Arya, mother and father.
Yeah. So the worst among them is creating a schism. And it's very interesting. They say, what's the karmic result? First of all, why are they called immediate misdeeds? They're called immediate misdeeds because if you do one of these 5 things, the karmic result is that you go immediately, in your next rebirth, you immediately go to hell realm with no other rebirth between this life and the hell realm rebirth. Okay. Each of those 5 immediate misdeeds cause a different kind of rebirth. The worst is creating a schism in the Sangha, and it results in the lowest hell called the hell of no respite, where one is reborn, they say in a column of fire, almost where you can't even tell that there's a being in the fire. You can only detect that there's a being in the fire by the sounds of the whimpering or something like that. And it's sounds pretty nasty. Anywho, so creating a schism results in that lowest rebirth, and it's very interesting. They say that, just to be quick, but basically they say that when you create a schism, you're destroying the Dharma body of an enlightened being. You're destroying the teachings of an enlightened being, and that beings' ability to become enlightened is affected, and that it says that it creates havoc in the spiritual lives of people around the world for the length of the schism, which I find to be very interesting because if I think about our own little schism, right, with Geshe Michael and Lama Christie, right? I mean, there are a lot of people doing powerful practice and very substantial practice, for years, and then you have this whatever you want to call it, these very sad events, and a schism as a result. With people assigning blame and pointing fingers, and many people left their practice and quit their practice and abandoned their commitments and abandoned their vows, and stopped studying, holy ideas, and just went on with their lives in other ways, right? And you could see it for a period of, a year or 2 or 3, or I don't know however long it went on. With people's lives really being disrupted, people really being upset, people really being thrown into chaos, people being deeply affected and deeply thrown off center, and so it's really I feel like those of us who have been through it have had sort of a little first-hand taste of the effect of a schism, and can have some appreciation for the power and the impact of a schism in that regard. It's very substantial, and you really see that it really does a lot of damage to a lot of beings.
I just want to say, because there were a lot of people through history that were blamed on creating a schism. One of them, for example, Nagarjuna, who created Mahayana, you can say. So people blame him to create schism and split. So they had a very clear what is like the schisms that create the river from hell, which is basically it's only when the Buddha is alive, and only at the time, and only after his 2 main disciples already appeared, and only at a certain time when he was already making the wheel of Dharma move, and like to make that type of schism, you have to to be really in the right, really in the wrong time, in the wrong place, in
Yeah.
a very specific
Sure.
position. And stuff.
Yeah, the stars have to line up nicely.
Yes, it's like it's not very easy to do that, Susan, but
Yeah, but the point that I make though is, you know, from our own experience, you can still see the effect of, in a spiritual group, you know, whatever the Sangha is, whether it's in a monastery where you have a collection of monks or nuns, you know, and people, and they start to have factions, and you start to have substantial, you know, just schismy behavior, right? I mean, forget about the Buddha and you know, the rest. I mean, just when you see people who are splitting and going in different directions and at odds, right, and not harmonious, it has a very substantial impact. And so in a spiritual undertaking, my point is in a spiritual undertaking, it's a very important, very profound, very holy activity, you know. And so anything which is causing people to, which is splitting people from that core practice and that core pursuit, it's a very powerful thing, you know. I mean, even now amongst us, you know, ordinary human practitioners, you know. So that was really what I was getting to. Okay, so just to go through it quickly and finish up. So, so then it says, in order of priority, it's creating a schism, then drawing blood from a Buddha with evil intent, then killing an arhat, then killing your mother, and killing your father. Okay. Let's see if we've got everything. I think we've got everything. Okay, I think the most important takeaway from this class is the chubab, really, is understanding karma and emptiness, and the chubab, understanding that chubab is me, you know? I could be anything. You know, the stuff which is here could be perceived as anything. And my goal and my intention is to perceive this stuff as pure, holy, enlightened being. And I'm not human from my own side. I just happen to be seeing myself as human at this moment in time, you know, because of causes collected previously. Okay? And I don't want to keep seeing myself as a human being. And I don't exist as a human being from my own side. You know, this guy right over here is not seeing me as a human being. And this one right over here is not seeing me as a human being. You know? I'm not a human being from my own side. And I don't want to keep perceiving myself as a human being. Although I do perceive myself as a human being validly right now. I need to collect the causes to see myself as a holy being. So I think that's the takeaway. Let's end there, okay?
Sashi Apoki Jishin Metotram Nrira Lingshin Yunde Yampadi Sambe Shindu Mite Gavargi Drogu Namda Shinla Chupasho Hidam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Ninyatayami Gawadi Gawokun Sunam Yeshe Soksokshien Sunam Yeshe Legend Way Dampa Kunito Parsho.
Please see the holy being at your crown becomes smaller and brighter, entering into your heart, blessing your mind stream, granting your request. You know, the power of our holy words and deeds this evening, may we quickly come to the end of all suffering. May we quickly collect all the causes for stainless enlightenment. May we quickly collect every cause for the emanation body so that we can help countless beings in countless realms in this very life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next week will be our last class until after the new year sometime. Not sure exactly when sometime, but work it out. And we'll have number 17 after the new year, right, which will be the review of courses